Hey everyone, so we're going to try something a little different today. As I mentioned in class, um, rather than go through our textbook together, um, I'm gonna record myself reading and talking about our book, and you'll then answer questions about it. And the reason we're going to do this is one, so we don't have to spend as much class time with just me talking. um, Two, I think you'll get more out of the textbook this way because you'll be able to stop and pause your video if there are things that you don't understand or things that you want to explore more. And then three, by being able to ask you questions while we're doing Edpuzzle, that'll give me more feedback on how well you're understanding the content. So I figured we'd start sort of this format and we'll see how it goes because we are in a new unit. Um, and that unit, as suggested by this title, is about Judaism and the Israelite kingdoms. So we're talking about a time period about 2000 BC, so 2000 years before Jesus Christ was born, to about 70 years after Jesus Christ's death. Um, and again, you see here some of the vocabulary words and some of the names and places that we're going to get to. Um, but let's continue, okay? So first we start with Abraham and Moses, and and I'll just read the textbook to start. So it says, while mighty empires rose and fell, a group of shepherds, which are like farmers or sheep herders, grew into a small nation. These people never ruled a powerful empire, but they were bound together by a strong religious faith, and their influence has been greater than that of many empires. These people are known by various names, including Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. So, the first concept that's really important to Judaism and ancient Israel, and again, if we zoom in on our map, we're talking about, again, this is what's considered modern day Israel. Um, you can also refer to it as Canaan. It's this area next to the Mediterranean Sea, a little bit to the east of Egypt, um, and to the west of, at the time, Mesopotamia, one of our other uh, empires. Okay. So the Hebrews settled in Canaan around 1800 BC, so close to 4,000 years ago. And again, this area has also been called Israel and Palestine. Um, One kind of key concept is this highlighted word monotheism. And monotheism just means a belief in one God, right? Like we've talked about, the Egyptians believed in thousands and thousands of gods, right? There was a God for water, a God for fire, a God for war. The Jewish people believed back then in one God who kind of controlled it all, and that was really unique at the time because again, this was a time when uh, people generally believed in more than one God, which would be called polytheism. Okay, so most of what we know about the people who lived at this time comes from the Hebrew Bible. Which is a series of writings that, depending on who you ask, were written by various people. But basically, what we need to know is that this tells the story of the Jewish people. We don't know exactly how much of it is factually true. We don't know how much of it actually happened, but this is what was written as sort of the story of the Jewish people. And it all begins with this thing called a covenant, which is that other yellow highlighted word, which is a religious agreement. And this was an agreement between Abraham, who's considered the first Jew, and God, right? So Abraham and God, as the story goes, had this sort of conversation that led to this covenant um, that said, okay, if Abraham, if you agree to this covenant rather, all of your descendants, so your children, your children's children, your children's children's children will be protected by God. And that's why sometimes you hear Jews called the chosen people. Okay? So they settle down in Canaan, which again is in this area near Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. They move around with their animals and their sheep, and they grow crops. They're living what, as the book calls, kind of a quiet life. At a certain point, according to the Hebrew Bible, there's this terrible drought that causes a severe shortage of food and that forces the Hebrew people to leave Canaan and settle in Egypt, where they eventually become enslaved by the Pharaoh to work on his buildings. Okay. And so this is where the story of Moses comes in, right? So the Israelites they're in Egypt for hundreds of years. They're away from their homeland. They're kept slaves by the pharaohs. And then the story goes that God chooses this man named Moses to help the Jews escape from Egypt. And this is where the story of Passover comes from, um, as Moses leads the Hebrew people out of Egypt. And you may be familiar with the story of the plagues. So they use the plagues and they escape from Egypt, and it takes them 40 years crossing the desert, um, and to get back to Israel or to Canaan, whatever your preferred word for that would be. Um, and while Moses is leading the people on this journey, he eventually comes to a place called Mount Sinai. Um, and that is where this famous conversation, again, as the story is told, of between Moses and God takes place. And God lays out the Ten Commandments, which, as we know, becomes kind of the basis of Judaism, Christianity, and the foundation for a lot of our own laws, such as the law against stealing another person's property, of course, the law against murder. It all stems from these Ten Commandments. One interesting thing is that Moses, we don't necessarily know if he was a 100% real person, right? Like he might have just been kind of a combination of different people that helped lead the Jews out of Egypt. Um, but nonetheless, the story has stuck with the Jewish people for thousands of years now. Okay. Um, so this is called the distinct culture. So again, the distinctive parts of the Israelites and the Jews at this time is their belief in one God, right? So they believe that all of these, that essentially the world is created by and dictated by this one God, and you have to be loyal to him. Otherwise, that's what's called like false idolatry. We don't have to get into that, but that would be like believing in more than one God or a different God. And sort of everything of their everyday life is built around this relationship between them and with God. Um, they have rules about what foods they can eat, about what days they can work on, um, and they have marriage laws, um, and generally kind of stayed to themselves. They did trade with other people, but they're mostly trying to keep their culture together. Um, so remember, Abraham makes this promise with God, right? Abraham is the first Jew, and God says, if you follow these laws, if you follow these rules, then I'm going to protect you and your people. And so eventually, Abraham's children and his children's children and his children's children's children, they wind up as part of the group that leaves Egypt to come back home to Canaan. And they have these 12 tribes, and when we say tribes, we're just talking about family groups, okay? So each tribe, each of these 12 tribes comes from Jacob. Okay. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. And Jacob, he has his children, and they have children. And eventually, by the time they leave Egypt, there are these 12 groups that come directly from Abraham's line. Okay. Um, and so these are the descendants that become known as the Israelites. Eventually, on the journey from Egypt to Canaan or Israel, Moses dies just of old age, and a leader named Joshua leads the Israelites back to the Promised Land. Him and his people go to war with the group called the Canaanites, who have taken over the land since the Jews left. And eventually the Israelites reconquer the land, and they set up what's called a confederation, which is a group of allies, right? It's not like a true government. Um, these different confederations, they do have different laws and different leaders, but they do ultimately all come together to work together to protect their culture and their people. Okay. So the beliefs and the texts of Judaism. Um, I just want to focus on these three uh, highlighted words plus that section about the sacred text. Okay. So the highlighted word kosher, those are foods that are specifically made according to Jewish laws, right? So animals have to be killed humanely. Dairy and meat can't be eaten together. Pork and shellfish are not allowed. Um, and there are people to this day that still follow these rules very carefully. People that are what we would call more either conservative or orthodox Jewish people follow these laws. Other religions certainly have them. Um, Islam has halal, um, for example. That's probably the closest relationship. But again, other cultures and religions have these laws, but they're kind of specific to each religion. The word synagogue is the building of prayer, right? So that's where the Jewish Hebrew people gather to pray to their one God, and their spiritual leaders are called rabbis, which are they're similar in a way. They're similar to priests, but they also have their differences. But they're basically the people that teach us and teach the Jews about the Torah, which, as we see here, the Torah is the Jewish holy book, right? It has it has the 5 books of Moses, and the belief is, and again, not everybody believes this to this day, but the belief at the time was that the Torah was written by Moses as told to him by God. Um, Other people, as time has gone by, kind of believe that different rabbis wrote the Torah. Based on stories that they heard and events that they witnessed. But the key takeaway is that the Torah is the Jewish holy book, and it contains Jewish laws and Jewish stories, um, and eventually this becomes kind of the basis of the Christian Bible. The Christian Bible changes some things around and adds some things, but this is the basis of it. Um, okay, and you can see over here, if I zoom in, is a picture of a Torah scroll written in Hebrew script. Okay. Um, and we don't really have to go over this, so um, I'm going to stop it here. If you need to rewatch any section, you're welcome to. I'm not going to grade the questions for accuracy. But I do want you to hopefully you tried your best so that I can just have an idea of what we need to go over again. Okay. So thanks for trying this new format out. We'll see how it plays out. Okay. So again, go ahead and rewatch if you need to, take notes, whatever you want to do.